Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabardi. Today is Wednesday, March 1st, and we have a bunch of NBA playoff action to dive into from last night. We had the absolute thriller of a Game 5 between the 76ers and Knicks. We had another very close game that sort of went under the radar because it was overlapping with that game, but between the Magic and Cavaliers, that was a great finish as well. We also got a surprising upset, if you will, between the Bucks and the Pacers, where the shorthanded Bucks were able to keep their season alive without both Damian Lillard and Giannis Antetokounmpo. So we're going to be talking about that. And then finally, we're going to be wrapping up the show with some talk surrounding LeBron James and what the offseason ahead looks like for him, as he does have a chance to enter free agency should he decline his player option. A lot of the reporting has said that there is a good chance that he could be on his way out of LA, so we're going to be diving into all of that. But before we get into the show, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. For our live viewers, be sure to use the comment section. Give us your thoughts on the latest happening on sports. We try and address as many comments as possible, make this show as interactive as we can. And if you would consider leaving a tip or donation, you can use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker. That is gsmcpodcast.net. Anything would be greatly appreciated. The first game we're going to be diving into today is that wild finish in New York between the 76ers and the Knicks, where Tyrese Maxey was able to overcome the odds and help keep this 76ers season alive. He scored 46 points in the win, and really it was in that fourth quarter where he did a lot of the heavy lifting. It seemed like for a lot of the game, the Philadelphia offense was pretty disjointed. Got a very weird Joel Embiid game that we're going to be getting to later in the segment here. But for Maxey, he just came alive in the fourth quarter, and especially when the odds were stacked against the 76ers, it seemed like their season was just about coming to an end. He did the improbable. The 76ers trailed by 6 points with 30 seconds left in the game. The Sixers called the timeout. They come out of the play. Maxey uses a screen, gets himself a three-point look. A really bad foul from Mitchell Robinson. There is a little bit of questioning there coming out of the timeout in reference to Tom Thibodeau and deciding to stick with Mitchell Robinson in a situation like that where Philly needs a three. Yes, to some degree, you want to make sure that you can protect the paint in case they go right there, but chances were Philly was going to need a three in that situation to be able to pull off the comeback. Robinson's in the game. He attacks too hard on the closeout against Maxey and fouls him. Maxey makes it and gets the and one, so a 4-point play there. 76ers then intentionally foul Josh Hart, who misses the first free throw. A lot of missed free throws, not just for the Knicks, but really for both teams. As incredible as Maxey was, he missed 3 straight in a stretch there. We had a missed free throw from Anunoby. Brunson missed one as well. So a little bit messy there from the free throw line from both teams. But Hart misses that first one, makes the second. So it is a 3-point game with just about 15 seconds left. And the 76ers get the ball. Maxey quickly sprints up the court, uses a screen, and before the Knicks really have a chance to foul him, he pulls up from the logo, buries the 34-footer, and that was ultimately what sends it to overtime. Now, Brunson had a chance to potentially walk it off there. I believe the Knicks had a timeout, but they choose not to go there, and Brunson ends up getting blocked. So then in overtime is where we saw a little bit more Joel Embiid, who, like I referenced to earlier, it was a very strange game for him where he clearly, just didn't seem fully comfortable. The turnovers were ridiculous for him in this game, and granted, we know Joel Embiid, even when he is sort of this hindered version of himself while dealing with this injury from his knee. Now, it seems like he's recovered a lot since then, but he's still not 100%. I think that is very clear. But, he's still getting double teamed a lot. But it wasn't even just that. He was just sloppy passing the ball. And it was just his accuracy almost that just wasn't good. And he was really brutal to start this game. Missed 7 of his first 8 shots. He finished with 10 turnovers in the game, was the final line for him. They actually said 9. It was 10 at one point, at least on the broadcast. So I guess they must have retroactively sort of changed the results of at least one of those plays. But again, one way or another, Embiid, it just did not look like the best version of himself. Now, he was good in overtime, playing defense. He got himself a couple buckets as well. So ultimately, that sort of gets swept under the rug. But if it's not for Tyrese Maxey, I feel like Joel Embiid comes out of this game. Sixers lose 4-1, and Embiid has a lot of questions surrounding himself headed into the offseason. Now Maxey sort of keeps the season alive here. And again, I know that Embiid was a big part of that overtime period, so we can't just overlook that necessarily. But at the same time, this just could have broken a very different way for Philly and Embiid if it weren't for the Maxey heroics in this one. Jalen Brunson on the other end, yet again, was really good. Scored 40 points in this one. I thought it was really interesting in that overtime period where, again and again, we see Brunson is looking to attack Joel Embiid on these drives in the pick and roll. And it was a little bit back and forth in terms of, the success rate of it, where Embiid was able to get Brunson a couple times. He blocked one of Brunson's drives. The next possession, we saw Embiid end up fouling him. It actually ended up being called a flagrant. A lot of Knicks fans were mad about it. I have a hard time, getting mad at Embiid for that. I understand that Embiid has built up a reputation during this postseason as a whole. I didn't think that play was necessarily dirty. It was absolutely warranting a flagrant foul because he hit him in the face, and the head and neck area is usually, the justification for the flagrant in those types of situations. But I didn't think that it was inherently dirty. It's a very awkward size mismatch for Embiid as a 7-footer playing this player in Brunson who's 6 feet, and he's trying to swipe down. Now, I don't know, you tell me in the comments section if you disagree. As much as I feel like Embiid has turned himself into a villain during this series, and I'm definitely the farthest thing from an Embiid defender, but I didn't think that it was quite as dirty as some of the fans necessarily did in this instance. But like I said, Brunson with 40 points in this game, and this was a little bit of a situation for the Knicks where we've seen it in big spots potentially, in other points of the season, where it's clear they need a second scorer along with Jalen Brunson, because the offense for them down the stretch was so Jalen Brunson reliant, and Brunson is a phenomenal player. We know this, but we also know in order to be a championship caliber team, you typically need multiple options, and it just doesn't feel like they have that right now. Now, of course, the fact that Julius Randle is injured plays a massive role in this. We also saw that Bojan Bogdanovic is also likely out for the remainder of the playoffs as well. Dante DiVincenzo isn't necessarily hitting at the rate that he was down the stretch of the regular season. He's been really struggling in this series, at least from an offensive perspective. It seems like Thibodeau at times has been leaning more towards Deuce McBride, who McBride's actually been awesome for them. He's also hit a lot of big shots, so it's not like they are completely out of options in terms of players that can actually get themselves on the court. But when the game tightens up at the end, they just feel very Brunson or bust to me. And the Knicks, they have a golden opportunity this year with sort of the situation surrounding Joel Embiid's injury, and there is, of course, Giannis's injury. Dame is dealing with something right now. Should they make the Eastern Conference Finals, there's a chance at least that Porzingis isn't going to be available. It was reported yesterday he's dealing with a soleus strain in his right calf, so feels like 3 weeks from now is when that Eastern Conference Finals would take place, and he would probably be available by then, but we don't know 100%. When you are 7'4", sometimes the recovery process can be a little bit prolonged. So, the Knicks have a nice opportunity ahead of them, but I really don't feel like they are a championship team just yet, and I really liked all the moves they made throughout the regular season to acquire these trades. I specifically thought that the OG Anunoby move was one that sort of showed that they're setting up more so a little bit. They're ready to win now, but it feels like next year is probably more so their window to, fully compete for the NBA Finals. And I see Anunoby as a really nice third piece where he's not necessarily going to create on his own, but he's an incredible catch and shooter. Those corners specifically, he takes advantage of those opportunities. But for the Knicks here, last night they run into this game playing just 7 players, and they are just very reliant on that. And I don't really know where the reinforcements are going to come from with Bogdanović out for the rest of the year, with obviously Randall, who we've known for some time. But last night, Thibodeau decided to stick away from the Precious Achiuwa minutes, which is pretty justifiable, even though, I still feel like at times Achiuwa does sort of intrigue me as a rotational player, but he's, at least from last night, being cut out of the rotation for them as well. So the offseason conversations with the Knicks are going to be had in time. I'm sure there are rumors about Devin Booker. I know that Stephen A. Smith sort of started the rumors, but it goes a little bit beyond that. There were some people at the Ringer talking about it as well. I saw a report earlier today that the Knicks are going to do everything they can to bring Devin Booker on board in New York. I feel like that would be along the lines of exactly what they need. They still have that Thibodeau defensive skeleton behind them. So Booker, Brunson, not necessarily seen as elite defenders, but never for a lack of effort. And, I feel like Brunson, the offensive fouls that he draws, and Devin Booker has never been short of being a competitor. Definitely something to monitor there. But in terms of the series as a whole and where it stands now, the 76ers, they now get to go back to Philly and potentially force this to a Game 7. So how we look at Game 5 is going to be very much predicated on how the rest of the series plays out. Because if the 76ers are actually able to pull off this type of a comeback, this is going to be a massive inflection point, really in NBA history, in terms of turning an improbable win into a run. Or the Knicks, who I still believe are just a better team than the 76ers, and obviously it very much depends on what version of Joel Embiid we get, and I just don't think that he's all there necessarily. So for the Knicks, I feel like, again, this could just be a little bit of a blip on the radar. We end up forgetting about it because the Knicks end up taking it to the 76ers. But the Sixers now do have a real chance to actually make something of this miraculous win. And it's going to be really interesting to see. Now, again, I still lean with the Knicks in this type of a series. I just feel like it was really Brunson just not hitting his shots. Now, the 76ers did clearly have a game plan early in this series to try and throw him off. It was helping off of some of these other players. Josh Hart hasn't necessarily, there's a reason clearly that they were helping off of him on the three-point line, where he hit the shots in Game 1. He was knocking them down in Game 2 as well, but offensively, the past 2 games, I believe he's hit just 1 of 13 looks, if I'm remembering off the top of my head. He was 1 of 6 last night. I think that he was 0 of 7 in Game 4. But, you know, it just goes back to the fact that this Knicks team does absolutely have the backbone to be finals contenders. I just feel like they are really limited from an offensive standpoint the way that they are currently built. And I wonder how Randle is going to fit into all of this. As much as I'm not necessarily the biggest Julius Randle fan, I also do understand the importance of him in a situation like this for the Knicks, and it's clear that they're missing him right now. So, you know, the 76ers end up winning this one. Final score was 112-106. There was a whole lot of action, whole lot of drama in this one. It feels like the series is just about right, as much as this was highly improbable. Game 2 also went down to the wire, was a crazy one with the Knicks on the other side of the comeback. Of course, there was the last 2-minute report that came out talking about Maxey was fouled on that inbound pass. Nick Nurse should have been granted the timeout. You've all heard it before, so I'm not going to, go on about it too much. But as much as the 76ers did sort of steal this game, I would say that the Knicks stole Game 2 as well. So 3-2 does feel like the position it should be in. And all things considered, this has been a very competitive series up to this point, where the point differential, I think Philly might actually be up when you look at the total point differential, basically just because Game 3 they had an 11-point win. But other than that, it seems like it's just very back and forth, and we're getting some great games out of this series. So I'm definitely not complaining in terms of getting a little bit more of this. An interesting conversation as well. Charles Barkley touched on it on the TNT broadcast, and Joel Embiid, I think, was sort of talking about it as well. The fact of what type of a crowd are we going to get in Philadelphia on Thursday night, because it was filled with Knicks fans the last time the two teams faced off in Philly in Game 4, which took place this past weekend. We heard the Brunson MVP chants that were really loud. Joel Embiid was getting booed as well, so curious to see whether or not Philly is going to sort of take some pride in their fandom and actually show up for their team this time around. But let me know what your expectations for the remainder of this series are. I do have the Knicks cleaning this up, but at the same time, this could get interesting. All it really takes is one of those other players for New York to get hot, I think, to be able to put this away. Jalen Brunson, I don't expect him to regress back to what he was in the first couple games, but they are just going to need somebody else to step up offensively for them in one of the next 2 games, and I do think that they should be able to take out Philly. But again, let me know what your thoughts on the rest of the series are. We are going to be now taking our first break of the show, and when we come back, I want to talk about another great game that we had last night between the Orlando Magic and the Cleveland Cavaliers. So stick with us, and we will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose if it's some moosey shit. A stupid myth, you choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We are now going to be touching on the series between the Orlando Magic and Cleveland Cavaliers. Feels like this series has sort of flown under the radar. Granted, each of the first 4 games weren't necessarily all that competitive, but it was 2-2 headed into Tuesday night, and we then finally got a really competitive Game 5 where the Cavaliers were able to edge out the Magic to take the 3-2 series lead. The home team has won in every single one of these games so far, so naturally the idea was sort of that the Cavs were going to be able to get the job done at home again, but there was the wrinkle that Jarrett Allen was dealing with a rib injury, so he actually wasn't available to play in this one. Isaac Okoro took his spot in the starting lineup, and it ended up being a really fun competitive game where I was watching the first half and the Magic really weren't getting anything done from the three-point line. They weren't shooting well. They weren't getting themselves the three-point line. They weren't getting themselves to the free throw line either, so they were relying on a lot of these mid-range shots that are just less high percentage shots, and it seemed like in my eyes that the Cavaliers were going to be able to, convincingly pull away in the second half, but Paolo Banchero is just one of the best difficult shot makers in the league in my eyes, and he hasn't necessarily gotten his shine just yet. The Magic aren't exactly the, biggest brand type of a franchise. I believe they only got one nationally televised game during the regular season, something along those lines, and people haven't really been able to watch Paolo in that national spotlight just yet, but he is absolutely incredible. He and Donovan Mitchell were just going back and forth in that fourth quarter, and it was a ton of fun to watch. He finished this game with 39 points. It was really fun to see the two-man game that it's not the prettiest thing in the world, and it's also a little bit sort of hindered because of the fact that it's not like the rest of this Magic team is very good at shooting. They're at the bottom of the league in terms of three-pointers made per game with just 11 during the regular season. I think that it marked 29th. I believe the Pistons were the only team worse. It was one of those, bottom of the lottery teams that they were just ahead of. But it was fun to see. They're starting to run a little bit more of a pick and roll game between the two of them with Paolo as the screener, at least from what I've seen. I have to track it a little bit closer as, the two continue to build off of their chemistry, but Paolo it's almost like a pick and pop because Franz is a great driver, so when he gets the mismatches, he is absolutely capable of getting himself to the rim, and he wasn't necessarily great in last night's game anyways, but it is an option there. And then Paolo, it almost looks like he likes to sort of pop out around the elbow and that free throw line for these mid-range jumpers, and he's kind of automatic with them, and he was hitting some tough fallaways, but I'm talking a lot of Magic right now, despite the fact that they did lose this game by 1 point, but again, I was just very impressed by Paolo once again. Don't think that he gets the recognition he deserves. But on the Cleveland side of this, like I mentioned, it was the show-off between Mitchell and Paolo for a lot of this fourth quarter. But the difference maker in this game was Evan Mobley. And his stat sheet isn't necessarily the most impressive thing in the world. 14 points, 13 rebounds, did have 4 assists, did have 2 steals, 2 blocks. So it's not like, you would look at that and say it's a bad game. But if you just looked at the box score, you also wouldn't necessarily understand the level of importance he played in this game, because Paolo was incredible shooting on the night as a whole, 14 of 24, 4 of 7 from 3. But when he was having trouble, it's when Evan Mobley was guarding him. I thought that he did a phenomenal job. I don't have the stats right in front of me, but the broadcast put together a graphic of the possessions where Mobley is guarding Paolo. He is really struggling. We know that Mobley has this ceiling, and his career trajectory up to this point has been a little bit weird because he was super promising as a rookie, and then they traded for Donovan Mitchell, and sort of threw themselves into win now expectations, where the fact that he was a little bit more limited offensively, there wasn't necessarily that same, time and development for him to be able to come into his own. Then you throw in the fact that they have Jarrett Allen as well, so it's these two big guys playing with one another. They don't necessarily have the spacing to be an elite unit offensively, and we've seen that. This was actually the first game that the Cavaliers have scored 100, the first playoff game in the past 2 seasons that the Cavs have scored over 100 points, which is a ridiculous stat given the type of era we're in with being so offensive heavy. But it's because there is absolutely a level of redundance with the Cavs, and I like every single player in their starting lineup, but I think that Garland and Mitchell are a little bit of a weird fit in the backcourt. Mobley and Allen are a little bit of a weird fit in the front court, and they just seem like they are a little bit of a redundant team. But last night, with no Jarrett Allen, we got to see Evan Mobley sort of operating the paint by himself, and I thought he was really impressive. And you've seen in some of these games the fact that he's looking to be a little bit more aggressive offensively. Now again, the stats don't necessarily pop out in a tremendous way. They already have a couple very high usage guards in Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell that his opportunities are inherently going to be a little more limited, but the fact that it does feel like he is developing at least a little bit more of a post-up game. He's at least shooting threes. Now, that's not his game, and he didn't last night, so I'm not saying this is a regular thing, but at times this series, he seemed unafraid to actually pull up. It would be nice to see him, hit more consistently, but I think that that's another part of his game that he is actively looking to build up, so that would be a huge piece for him. And I feel like his awareness of playing off of the ball, he just puts himself in better positions to actually, be an effective outlet under the basket, where, the play of the game for him was late in the game where Mobley got a dunk with just about a minute left, where Darius Garland, he drove into the paint, he drew an extra defender in Wendell Carter Jr. At the time that Garland took off, Evan Mobley was sort of on that right side along with Garland in the short corner. He sort of ran down the baseline, curled around, and just sat in the paint, and Garland was able to get him the ball off of this wraparound pass. He gets the dunk, and that was, one of the key baskets of the game. He had a couple, and then on the other end, you have the situation where he ended up getting the game-sealing block on a Franz Wagner drive and pinned him off the backboard, which basically won the game for the Cavs in this instance. It's really encouraging to see, because again, I was a big fan of Evan Mobley coming into the NBA, and after his rookie season, I was really high on him, but I feel like these past couple seasons, I had sort of sold my stock on him slightly, and I do believe it's in large part because of the fit with that Cavaliers team right now, and again, the fact that his development was sort of rushed based off of the situation there in Cleveland, but he is showing these flashes, and I'm definitely not ready to count him out. I think that he and Jarrett Allen both sort of deserve their own front courts to operate in. It's just a very clunky fit as things currently stand. The Cavaliers sort of feel like a team. I mean, there's really sneakily, and again, it's Cleveland and they're playing Orlando, so it's not a series that's necessarily in the national spotlight as much as maybe they should be, but I feel like there's a lot weighing on this series for the Cavaliers. The whole Donovan Mitchell decision, whether or not he is going to want to stay there in Cleveland. The impressions early on here are that he doesn't. He has a player option after next season. He's probably going to decline that, assuming he reaches free agency anyways, and the Cavs don't extend him. But, I think that definitely weighs on them. JB Bickerstaff is absolutely coaching for his job right now. If the Cavaliers are bounced in the first round yet again, he knows that he is going to be out there in Cleveland, at least in my eyes. Not that I'm necessarily advocating for anybody to lose their jobs, but that does definitely feel like the consensus surrounding the Cleveland situation right now. And they would sort of be in position, I think, if they can't beat a Magic team that I've had a lot of fun watching this year. As a Celtics fan personally, I think I would rather see the Cavs than the Magic, because the Magic are, at least, they know what their identity is. They are a defensive monster, and I feel like they would be in extremely tough out. So, I only point that out to say I definitely don't underestimate the Orlando Magic, but from the Cavs' perspective here, you just sort of sold off a lot of your future to try and be competitive now, and you're going to lose to this Magic team that is sort of young, still figuring themselves out, still refining their game. This is coming off of a year where they were embarrassed by the New York Knicks in the first round last year. It seems like they would maybe be in a position for a little bit of a panic trade. Again, I say panic trade, but this is a team that I do think needs to make a move, and they probably would have made a move if it weren't for the fact that around the trade deadline, they were blazing hot when basically everybody but Donovan Mitchell was injured, and he led them on that incredible mid-season run where they were competing for the 2 seed and they were playing some really good basketball. So ultimately, I don't think we see the same iteration of this Cavs team next year, but that decision will be impacted on how the rest of this series plays out. So next game is going to be in Orlando. Like I've said, the home teams have been dominating this series up to this point. So, we'll see. History from the series up to this point would say that it is going to be the Orlando Magic, but time will tell on that one. Game 6 is on Friday, so going to be interesting to see. But that is all we really have on this segment. We're going to be taking our second break now, and when we come back, I want to dive into the Bucks-Pacers game from last night, where we saw the Bucks also able to keep their season alive. So stick with us, and we will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Headed into our third segment here, and we are going to be talking about the Indiana Pacers and Milwaukee Bucks. This seemed like it was a game where Indiana was pretty much primed to clinch their first round victory. They were going up against the Bucks team without both Damian Lillard and Giannis, and it ended up being this shorthanded Bucks team that took it to Indiana. And it was especially surprising because, coming out of the gates, it seemed like Indiana was just absolutely blazing from three, was putting the offense on Milwaukee, and was going to be cruising their way. But I did think it was interesting. I got a notification on my phone, at least, headed into the game that 75% of the public money was on Indiana to win. And whenever that's the case, it does just always feel a little bit sketchy. And clearly it was, because the Bucks ended up finding something in that second quarter, specifically on the defensive end, that they were just able to shut down Indiana. And a massive part of it was Bobby Portis and the job that he was doing to guard Pascal Siakam, who was pretty much unguardable for the Bucks through the first few games of this series. And Portis took on the defensive role. He took on the offensive role as well. He just had a phenomenal game, 29 points, 10 rebounds. We've seen all season long. I feel like the fact that, and correct me if I'm mistaken, was he a finalist for the Sixth Man of the Year? He might have come in third, and I had him as third anyways, so maybe I'm making something that isn't. He definitely deserved to be in that Sixth Man of the Year conversation, but he really steps up anytime some of these starters, and specifically it feels like when Giannis is out and they need sort of that big man scorer, it feels like Portis steps up to the task, and he was incredible in this one. Chris Middleton continues to really get himself cooking, which is a very interesting sort of factor in the Bucks postseason run, because he was unbelievable for them, I thought, in their postseason run in 2021. Doesn't really feel like it gets talked about quite as much. Feels like that Bucks run, people are just sort of playing revisionist history with it and saying that it wasn't really fun to watch and that it was flawed. I understand that the Nets were dealing with some injuries to Kyrie Irving and James Harden, but I feel like that Giannis finals performance in general was just so fun to watch. And the Suns were a good team that year too. So, ultimately, I just feel like this is a tangent that I don't want to go on too much, but I feel like that 2021 playoffs definitely sort of flies under the radar as well. But Middleton, he's been a step slower since that postseason run because he's been dealing with injuries each of the past couple seasons. He was dealing with an injury again this year, and it did seem like it was taking him a little while to find his touch, but really it was last Friday in the Game 4 matchup that the Bucks end up losing that game. That was the Tyrese Halliburton game winner in overtime, but Chris Middleton went nuclear in that game, scored 42 points, which included the ridiculous deep three that was sort of fading to the side that ended up sending that game to overtime. Reminded me a lot of, I'm forgetting exactly which year of the playoffs it was, but when the Bucks faced the Celtics and Middleton with like a second left in the game, shot a three from, the corner around half court, and that went in to send it to overtime. And, Middleton is a postseason performer when he's actually healthy. We've just sort of been deprived of that the past couple years. And, just yet again, he was able to put together a performance. This is 3 straight games for him with 25 points. He finishes with 29 in this game on Tuesday night to help keep the Bucks alive here. And this does become a little bit of an interesting point here, because Indiana, for as fun and talented as they are, they're still young. And this felt like a situation where we saw it in Game 1, they kind of came out flat. This game, they didn't come out flat, but it almost seemed like they got ahead of themselves after that hot first quarter. And the Bucks were doing real things to, take away their offense. So I'm not trying to, discredit the Bucks and fully put this on the Pacers, but it just doesn't feel like they have that level of maturity yet, maybe to sort of fully understand the consequences of these types of moments. Now, they're going to be back home in Indiana for Game 6. I believe that game takes place on Thursday night, so they're going to have some time to recoup and whatnot. But it does leave the door open for the potential return of Damian Lillard and possibly Giannis, who it seems like from the reporting, at least last night that they were doing on TNT, that Giannis is feeling much better, that he got a great workout in the other day. And from my perspective, at least, I didn't think it was a good idea to force Giannis back. And again, force is sort of the key word there. I still wouldn't force him back if he doesn't feel like he's right and that the doctors aren't, fully clearing him to play. But for at least the sake of last night, let's say Giannis was, 80% with a chance of re-injury. I don't know if it would have necessarily made sense to risk potentially losing him for all of next season if things were to go terribly wrong. That calf injury especially, I mentioned this with Porzingis, on, those really tall, strung out bodies, it can just be a very risky game to play when you have a kinetic muscle like that and you are trying to sort of test it out there and force it through physical activity that it's not ready for. Kevin Durant is the comparison that I keep making that I'm almost getting sick of, but you know the story in the 2019 playoffs. Calf injury to torn Achilles cost them the entire next season. Obviously, if you're the Bucks, you can't afford that. So, trying to throw him out there in a Game 5 when you're down 3-1, it is definitely a move that I wouldn't be comfortable making. But if he is feeling better, now 3-2 series is doable. You just have to steal this next one in Indiana, and you have home court advantage for Game 7. Now, obviously, we still don't know. I'm sort of speculating right now on the injury front in terms of Giannis. Lillard as well is still an interesting case, dealing with that ankle injury that he suffered in Game 4. But, the Bucks may have figured something out a little bit, at least defensively against this Pacers team. Held them to just 92 points. I don't have the exact numbers, but feels like it's been forever since Indiana has been held to 92, one of the best offenses in the league this season. So, again, I just feel like also with the discrepancy between the maturity levels of both of these two teams, Indiana is still gettable despite having this lead. And, we've seen this has been a chippy, emotional series at time. So much so that Bobby Portis got himself ejected from Game 4 after he hit Andrew Nembhard. Nembhard has been a little bit of a heel this series. He's gotten into it with different players on the Bucks multiple times. Last night we saw Patrick Beverley, who was really feeling himself in the second quarter. I thought was definitely a catalyst to sort of help the Bucks get into it in the second quarter. After going scoreless in the first, he had at least 12 in the second. But for Beverley, there was that instance where Obi Toppin ended up getting a technical foul because he was playing that little bit of keep away from Beverley, as he does regularly, sort of after the whistle. Bucks ball, he's sort of trying to hound Toppin a little bit, trying to steal it from him. Toppin's trying to keep it away, and then he ends up shoving Pat Bev to the ground. Just a little bit of a boneheaded move there, but that's also just comes with the fact that this has been a very contentious rivalry sort of during this whole regular season. They've faced each other 9 times now on the year, which is pretty uncommon, and they have a chance. They're going to be playing a 10th time tomorrow night with a potential for an 11th as well. And this rivalry has just become a little bit of an unexpected gem for NBA fans this season. And again, I really like the Pacers. They're another team where it feels like they're a year away from being necessarily true contenders. Now, again, defensively, I feel like it's going to be hard to hold the Pacers back in both of these next 2 games. Now, Giannis would be a massive X factor in that type of a situation where Bobby Portis was phenomenal against Pascal Siakam last night, but maybe you have Giannis on him. There's also, this dynamic of having Siakam at the 4 and Miles Turner at the 5 for Indiana has really put Milwaukee into this tough position where I talked about it before. Feels like Brook Lopez is a little bit lost at times. He's still a great defender, but in terms of, especially when it comes to those one-on-ones in the post, but he's been playing out along the perimeter, it feels like, a lot more than he typically does. And when he hasn't, he's been leaving Pascal wide open, and Pascal's been making him pay. Then when Lopez is trying to guard Turner, he's out there, but he also can't protect the paint, which opens up the lane for a lot of these other players. But last night, again, seemed like Portis was taking on that Siakam role, that assignment that is, really well. And again, Doc Rivers has been heavily scrutinized since he took over this Milwaukee job earlier this year. I've said it all season long, and I guess I'll say it one more time here. The idea behind firing Adrian Griffin and bringing in Doc Rivers wasn't because the Bucks weren't winning enough games, but it was because the front office didn't feel that A, Griffin had the locker room, and that B, the style of play that they had was not championship level. And last night, I definitely feel like was a Doc Rivers defensive assignment. That's what he has brought to the Bucks this year, and they've been a roller coaster, no doubt about it. But they have undeniably been playing better defense since he got there. And without him and with Adrian Griffin last night, without their stars, I find it very hard to believe that the Bucks win that game. So again, 3-1 leads, we know how uncommon they are. Just like we talked about, with the Knicks or Sixers, a couple things have to break, and it might just be out of your hands if you are one of these teams trying to pull off the comeback. But we'll see. Again, I think that the path is there. Now, Game 6 in Indiana is going to be incredibly difficult for them to pull off, but if they get their stars back, this could definitely be a conversation. I was leaning with the Pacers anyways headed into this series. That was assuming Giannis would be back after I was thinking he'd be back around Game 3, Game 4. So what is Giannis even going to look like if he is back? As much as I talked about, he is sort of the defender that the Bucks need to try and match up personnel-wise. What version of him are we going to get? Are they going to give him sort of a higher-end defensive assignment? Still a lot of unknowns surrounding this series, but should be fun to see how this all plays out. But that is all we have on this series. We're going to be taking our final break now, and when we come back on the other end, we are going to be just sort of talking out the possibilities for LeBron James in the offseason. So stick with us, and we will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. To wrap up the show today, we are going to be touching on LeBron James and his future. The beginning of this week has just been jam-packed with all different types of stories, so this is coming a little bit later, but I did want to sort of talk about this idea of what is next for LeBron James. There's been a lot of speculation surrounding his future, sort of stems from the fact that he said he wasn't going to, commit to anything when he spoke at the press conference following the Lakers being eliminated the other night. So he himself hasn't necessarily committed to anything, to his defense. Why would he? But he, there's a lot of speculation. Last night he posted this was yesterday, I believe, Tuesday afternoon, that he posted on social media a couple tweets about how he said, quote, "I've heard a lot of reports about my future. I said it last night, and I'll say it again. I do not know yet, as I'm only thinking about spending time with my family and friends. When I know, after speaking with them, with the fam, my counsel as well." I'm sorry. Phone was just refreshing there. As my representation about it, and then you guys will know. Until then, And then he posted some emojis as he typically does. Classic LeBron James. But it is definitely an interesting conversation. There was also a report that came out from ESPN's Adrian Wojnarowski yesterday that supposedly playing with Bronny James is not the top priority that it prior was. And I feel like to some degree that's because we see LeBron James is still able to play basketball at a very high level. And in his mind, he definitely still feels like he is capable of being a highly contributing, potentially even best player on a championship winning team. Now, is that fully the case? I feel like it's a little bit hard for him to be the clear and undoubted 1A on a championship team still, but at the same time, the way that he plays and the way that he can elevate his play in the postseason, I wouldn't necessarily rule it out either. But his options are definitely going to be very interesting for the offseason, where he has a player option that would, I believe, get him $50 million if he were to stay in Los Angeles for next season. Now, I'm sure for him, he knows that the money is going to be there for him no matter what, just about. It's more so about, can he be in a championship winning environment? And is that with the Lakers? So he can get $51 million with that player option this offseason, which for a 40-year-old is ridiculous to still be playing basketball, but we're talking about LeBron James, who pretty much defies the regular rules of Father Time. And, it's definitely a tempting option there. His family's in LA. We're going to see how this all plays out with Bronny James. I feel like especially if that's not a top priority for LeBron, and I don't know if necessarily he is going to come out, because as much as it's maybe unfair to say this about Bronny, flat out, I do not think that he is an NBA-ready prospect. I feel like he could benefit from another year in college. He had a weird season this past year, obviously dealing with the cardiac arrest to start off the year, missed a handful of training camp, and then came into a very underperforming USC team that had a lot of sort of veterans on the roster, so it seemed like he almost didn't think that he could be quite as assertive for himself. But, if he is going to return to, it doesn't seem like he's going back to USC anyways. They made the head coaching change. Enfield is going to SMU, so it seems like he would probably be entering the portal, meaning what is the rest of the family going to do as well? And again, we're talking about LeBron, so of course family is a big conversation surrounding him. But, for LeBron, I feel like there isn't quite as much incentive to stay in LA next year as there has been in the past. Now, I would say that they do have some pieces. Anthony Davis just had the best season of his career in my eyes. So is that somebody that he wants to, sort of hitch his wagon to? I could absolutely see it. And then if you use these draft picks that, because of the fact that the Lakers did not make any moves during the trade deadline, I believe they have 3 tradable first round picks for this offseason, so they could potentially make a splash move, but there are just a handful of holes that they sort of have to fill out. I think they're going to likely be moving on from head coach Darvin Ham, finding somebody new there. They probably need to upgrade at both the point guard positions with D'Angelo Russell and their other swingman in Rui Hachimura, at least from a starting lineup perspective. So we'll see how they choose to play that out. It's not necessarily a clear path, and you're in the Western Conference where the Nuggets, of course, have a stranglehold as things currently stand, but if they don't, it's because the Minnesota Timberwolves are red hot coming into the scene, and we're going to see them only likely continue to get better. The Oklahoma City Thunder just swept the New Orleans Pelicans, so they're on the rise. I think that the Pelicans are probably in a position this offseason where they try and make a big move. If Zion Williamson is healthy, that can definitely be a team that takes a step forward as well. There's a lot going on in that Western Conference, which is why, it's a little bit interesting. Now, in terms of fit, I just threw out the idea of, well, does LeBron James want to keep playing with Anthony Davis? Part of it is reliability. The 76ers are going to have a max cap spot in the Eastern Conference that would likely have an easier playoff path, has another superstar talent in Joel Embiid, has a rising star in Tyrese Maxey, and a pretty well-rounded group as a whole, but at the same time, in terms of reliability, I don't know if Joel Embiid is the person that you sort of want to lean into, given his track record from an injury standpoint. So it's just a very interesting conversation sort of surrounding what LeBron chooses to do. Another team that has sort of been thrown out there as a potential destination for him is Dallas, joining back up with Kyrie Irving. They could definitely use, I like the plethora of options that Dallas has from a wing position, whether you're talking about Dante Exum, Derek Jones Jr., Josh Green, but throw LeBron James in there, it's without a doubt an upgrade. And I feel like, it would be LeBron probably playing more off ball than he ever has in his career. But I feel like, at least from a regular season standpoint, that's probably something that he would enjoy, not having to, burden himself offensively. And you know what? For as much as LeBron James is older now, and he does get criticized at times for some of the defensive lapses, I thought that some of the effort that he showed from the play-in tournament games, taking charges against Zion, and what he was doing early in this series, specifically against the Nuggets, I thought he was really maxing out his effort on the defensive side of the ball, and that would probably be what he would have to do to sort of make those sacrifices, if you will, in terms of not going to be exerting as much effort offensively. Now, can you be this sort of, again, regular season lockdown is definitely a stretch, but can you be this two-way wing that we need while we already have our top ball handlers in Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic to carry much of that offensive load? It is an interesting question. And ultimately, when you are looking at this from a Lakers perspective, before we sort of wrap this whole thing up, I do feel like it's an interesting conversation, because there was a report that came out yesterday that the Lakers, that is, would be willing to give him a contract extension of a 3-year deal worth $164 million. I can't blame them for that necessarily. Is LeBron even going to want to take a deal that is that much committal into the future? Maybe not. He would have a lot less flexibility to sort of make a potential move to link up with his son in a couple years, or, anything along those lines. But, so, if you're the Lakers, I can understand wanting to continue to be competitive from a business standpoint, having the brand of LeBron James and Anthony Davis, and feel like you were competitive at least. I know that the series was 4-1, and it did seem like the Nuggets were a different class in terms of their execution, but it's not like the Lakers in either of their two past series against the Nuggets have gotten steamrolled, even though the Nuggets have won something along the lines of 12 of their last 13 matchups, or 11 of their last 12, whatever it is. The Nuggets have definitely owned the Lakers, but again, it doesn't feel like they are necessarily miles away from being able to steal a few more games from the Nuggets by any means. And, so from the Lakers, if they want to continue to be competitive, they now have, they can justify that their coaching wasn't good enough this past season. They get an upgrade there. They have these multiple draft picks now, as opposed to the one that they had during this past trade deadline, and try and get someone like Donovan Mitchell, I feel like would probably be the number one player sort of on the market for them. I don't know if they have the cap space directly right now, but Paul George is going to be a free agent. It's not like free agency necessarily has quite the same level of impact because everybody's just signing these extensions now while they're under contract, so it leads to a lot of the trade speculations and whatnot. I mean, who knows? Maybe they try and make a swing at Kevin Durant. I highly doubt they have the assets. I doubt that the Suns would even necessarily be willing to move off of Kevin Durant and giving him to a rival in the Lakers, even though if they could get some of those draft picks down the line, would probably be great value, which the Suns absolutely do need in terms of, long-term draft picks, considering all of the picks they've moved off of in recent years. Just throwing out the idea at least, but for the Lakers, this is the idea of them fully buying into the core and trying to compete for another championship, which I have a hard time saying that's the wrong idea. But at the same time, if they did go the other direction, if LeBron says, I don't want to come back to LA, I'm going to decline this player option, I want to go somewhere else, I don't think that would be quite as devastating for the Lakers as we've sort of seen it be devastating for teams after LeBron leaves in the past, because they got their championship. It's not like they're going to feel like this was a failure by any means. They let him walk. They actually had more power over LeBron, it feels like, than any of these previous franchises have had with him. They held on to their draft capital. They still have it in the long term. They would also have this potential Anthony Davis trade piece, who is coming off of, in my eyes, the best year of his career. And they could probably get a haul for him as well and just sort of press the reset button. I know it wouldn't be super exciting and it would be hard to let all of that sort of walk, but at the same time, I do think that the Lakers can be okay in all of this one way or another, whichever direction they go. And obviously, if they are going to fully commit to next season with LeBron, AD, and potentially another star, it does add some pressure in the long term in terms of, are we going to actually win this season and make this all worth it? That would become a question, but I still have a hard time, saying that would definitively be the wrong move for them. So I think that they have options, and I feel like it's going to be really interesting to monitor this going forwards. There are a lot of options on the table. I'm sure this isn't going to be the last time we talk about it moving forward here, but that is all I have on that as things currently stand, and that is all we have for the show today. Thank you very much for tuning in to the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. We run this live every 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us, and we will see you tomorrow afternoon. Thanks for tuning in.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great.